What we're going to be talking about is a little different from what the previous group talked about. We've all heard the good side of the home automation scene. However, now we're going to be talking about the insecurity of things instead of the Internet of Things. Presenting here today is Brian Flores, Trevor Randolph, and myself, Lucas Kelley Kieffer. However, another key member of our research team, Dan Artmeyer, is in the audience. So, as I said today, we're going to be going over the insecurity of things. This is 1, home automation systems, 2, Z-Wave and how it affects and how it should affect your business and your home, and 3, how to protect your hide from a security attack. Starting off, well, what is Z-Wave? Z-Wave is a radio frequency control protocol, and it was designed to achieve reliable communication and operation between different products from different manufacturers, like Greg said in the previous speech. Z-Wave lets devices talk and respond to each other and operates at the sub-gigahertz range. In the US, most commonly found at the 900 megahertz range. This is due to 3 clauses. 1, to lessen interference at lower frequencies. 2, longer wavelengths that penetrate objects such as walls. And 3, in Z-Wave and Sigma designs, the owner and creator of Z-Wave's most crucial point, the low power consumption of the products. Z-Wave is extensively used in residential systems, as we saw in the home automation side of the previous speech and the home of IoT. However, key system providers include ADT, AT&T, Honeywell, Lowe's, and Verizon, along with others on the slide, just to name a few. There are currently over 40 million Z-Wave products worldwide, with 80% of the home security market being Z-Wave. However, a crucial keynote from this slide is that Z-Wave may or may not be encrypted. Here, we're going to be talking about a more technical side of Z-Wave. With the Z-Wave protocol stack, it's based off the ITUT recommendation G9959, physical and MAC layers. Here we have the model. Starting from the bottom up, we have the physical layer, and modulation and coding and insertion of the preamble is used for the synchronization at the receiver. The MAC layer, we take care of medium access control of nodes based on collision avoidance and back-off algorithms. At the transport layer, we see ray transmission, acknowledgements, and checksums. The network layer, we see frame routing, topology scans, routing tables, and updates. And finally, at the application layer, we see Z-Wave specific commands such as turning on and off the alarms. So, as you saw in Josh's home, we can see some current home automation things. So we have an HVAC control, Windows control, security and alarm settings, motion sensors, door lock controls, etc. Most of this, as you can see, was in a GUI interface and was presented that way so it can either be held on your desktop application or even on your smartphone. So, like I said earlier in the previous slide, the Z-Wave market share is currently over 1,200 Z-Wave products available to buy. And that most recent statistic was taken off of their live Twitter feed just last week, with over 40 million Z-Wave products used worldwide. Same infograph from the same Twitter page. Now, the tools of the trade that we're going to be talking about in our research that is very crucial for both ours and the others' research that we will be talking about soon are some of the hardware, and generally it costs less than $100. On the far left, we see the Z-Wave remote. This was most recently used at DerbyCon 2015. On the right, we see the TICC 1110 package. This was used at Black Hat 2013, as well as a subsect of that CC11 package, which we have available with us today, if you'd like to see after the presentation, for our demonstration and research. Finally, we have the GoodFET and TICC 1111 EMK. This was used by Joshua Wright, which was the fundamentalization and research with Zigbee technology, a close relative to Z-Wave. Finally, you heard me talk earlier about Sigma designs. Sigma Designs is the creator and owner of Z-Wave technology. However, our group has dubbed it the protector of Z-Wave technology due to the non-disclosure agreements and the fact that to work and openly publish within the Z-Wave technology network, you have to pay for the developer's kit, which is $3,000, as well as sign this NDA. However, what you'll see in most books and research papers is that they can't go into full-fledged detail of what they did due to these non-disclosure agreements, which means the publishing for it was absolutely horrid. So what we saw was what we got, and our own research is what we got into. For this next slide, I'm going to be handing it off to our lead researcher, Trevor Randolph.
So what we noticed is exploits in home automation have a long-standing history. This stuff didn't just come around. Since the birth of home automation, certain researchers have pointed out key facts. Some of the whys: vendors are constantly trying to push cutting-edge technology, and unfortunately, security isn't the primary concern. Sort of a trend we noticed is innovate first, secure later. And this just isn't in home automation or IoT devices. This is pretty much across all technology. You know, you'll see this same innovate first and secure later. You will see the same issues that we mentioned across generations of home automation. And then kind of a quote to sum it up is insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, then expecting different results. So this is the timeline of the research that we based our project off of. In 2009, you'll see Killer Bee Practical Zigbee Exploitation Framework by Joshua Wright. 2013, Honey I'm Home by Barang Fuladi and Sahan Ganaun. And then most recently, as mentioned at DerbyCon 2015, Stealthy and Persistent Backdoor for Z-Wave Gateway Devices by Jonathan Fuller and Ben Ramsey. So the first talk that we examined, Killer Bee Practical Zigbee Exploitation Framework by Joshua Wright. Joshua Wright is a SANS Institute instructor. At the time in 2009, he was doing penetration testing for large corporations, and he was noticing this product in the workplace. There was no tool set, there was nothing to test it, so he devised, his product or his package, what he calls Killer Bee. Under the hood of Zigbee, it uses IEEE 802.15.4. One of the key features or the key, downsides of Zigbee is key exchange for the first time is done over the air, and it's in clear text. It's not encrypted. So if you are on site during, a first device hookup, you can capture the key. And then also something he noticed is devices store the key in RAM. So if you have physical access, you get the device, you dump the RAM to a file, and through his toolkit, Killer Bee, you can then decrypt the traffic. And his big issue is the only solution that he was able to get from vendors is, not plausible to fix it. We can't go reflash the chips on all the devices. So we'll get to it in the next generation. Another big downside to Zigbee is once you have the key, you can put it into Wireshark, and it'll decrypt the traffic in real time. And then also he was concerned about replay attacks. He was able to, do replay attacks where he'd capture a packet, send it back to the controller, without the device sending it to the controller. The next talk we'll look at was Honey I'm Home by Barang Fuladi. He's at the Microsoft Skype's research and development team. And then also his partner was Sahan Ganaun, who now he's a principal systems engineer at Honeywell. And one of their key focus was why Z-Wave technology. At the time, wireless security topped the homeowner's wish list. 80% of home security at the time was using Z-Wave, but it had no public research. And that was one of their main concerns. There's a lot of people using this, but do you really know what you're using? Another huge thing they figured out was they identified the inconsistencies with the actual implementation of the ITUT recommendation G9959. So basically what they did was during their research, they went back to Sigma Designs and said, this is what we found. Do you see similar? Because this is standardization. It's not supposed to be diverted from, it should be what's in this recommendation. And they came back and they said, yes, there is, you will see discrepancies, we're aware of it. And during the next standardization, it'll get fixed. What they also developed is a tool called Z-Force. So basically, they use C# to create a tool to capture and replay Z-Wave packets. And then also what they did was, for their research, they created the firmware to flash to the CC1110 chip. The firmware, this wasn't out available. As mentioned, you sign an NDA when you want to work with this equipment, so, they're not going to pass this stuff out to everyone. Also, a key issue in their talk is they discovered a critical implementation vulnerability in Z-Wave security layer and just demonstrate a remote attack to compromise an AES encrypted Z-Wave door lock. Basically what happened was they were able to reset the encryption key without being the main controller. And one of the good things about their talk is they not only found issues, but they also suggested, well, how can you fix this issue? Which you don't see a lot at, some of these black hat talks. So what they were able to do is they were able to reset the encryption key without being the controller. Some of their issues, or some of the resolutions for the issue, would simply check the current key state. If there's already an encryption key set between a home controller and the device, there's really no need for it to be reset. And if there is a key established, don't allow it to be reset. One thing they also stressed is attacks like this are very hard to detect. The controller's not going to tell you, you're not going to be able to see this information. Like many other RF devices, it is susceptible to jams. One thing that they stressed, if you do have a motion sensor, a door lock, if worst case scenario, the device doesn't talk to the gateway, just assume the worst. Lock the door, alert the, trip the sensor, that it was set, rather than, just not allowing any talking between the devices. And then a key with their software is they were able to, do replay attacks, capture motion sensor being tripped off, send it back to the device, or there is no motion, go in front of the sensor, different things like that. They were able to resend packets to the main controller. Our third and final talk was this September at DerbyCon, stealthy and persistent backdoor for Z-Wave gateways. Jonathan Fuller's a master's student at the Air Force Institute of Technology here in Dayton, Ohio, and then also his professor, Ben Ramsey. They worked on the project. All their work is done under the assumption that they are able to gain access to the wireless network. What they have is, as Lucas mentioned, the controller. What they would do is the handheld controller. They would, you can send an inclusion packet to the main gateway, so it's waiting for a device to connect. From there, they would inject the first rogue controller. So they were able to replicate traffic between the gateway itself and then the Z-Wave devices. From then, what they would do is then they would use the second controller to replicate traffic between the first rogue controller and then the main device. So what happens, a homeowner, they go to their device list, they see a rogue controller, well, I'll just get rid of it. That's fine, but you still have the second row controller. It's no longer, it doesn't show up in the list. And then also, if they do kick the first row controller, you're still going to be able to replicate, capture traffic. Also, another issue is, let's say altogether, they're like, okay, I don't like this Z-Wave stuff. Let's just take out the main gateway itself. The controller is still able to talk to the Z-Wave devices in their home. Only locally, so within 20 meters or so, but it's still kind of scary. A rogue controller out there, someone turn it off, you're on and off your lights. So that was their main stress in their talk. So our research, originally we ordered the CC1110 chip. We used a Verilight home controller and a Schlage RP200 lamp module. We first had the TI Smart RF tool, which lets you capture or see different frequencies, what's happening. And then we thought right away we'd be able, this doesn't look too bad right away, we'd be able to capture packets, replay, do different things. And it seemed, everyone made it seem so easy in their talks, we didn't think we'd have too many issues. So going in, we did have quite a bit of issues, so we went back to the drawing board and we developed a game plan. What we had to do was we had to solder header pins on the C1110 chip to allow it to interface with the computer. From there, we used a USB to serial adapter that would allow us talk between Z-Force itself and the controller, and the devices. We had to flash the devices with the firmware that Ganown and Filati created, but then we ran into a brick wall. Basically, the devices were able to talk between each other, but we were unable to capture Z-Wave traffic. At this point, we were kind of stumped. We were not experts in the field by any means, so we didn't really know what was going on. So we actually reached out to Filati and Ganown, and they actually did reply. And that was quite surprising. Yeah, they told us, unfortunately, what we released is only EU frequency. Knowing that we were from the United States, he said, unfortunately, not going to get too far. He suggested that we take a different path of some different research, but we stuck on what we started. So then we were able to locate a book, Hacking Exposed Wireless, 3rd edition, Wireless Security Secrets and Solutions. by Joshua Wright and Johnny Cash. So Joshua Wright is the gentleman you may notice from the first Zigbee talk. Basically, he came back to Z-Wave and did the same thing. In his book, though, he released information that, unfortunately, the first two gentlemen, they did sign an NDA, so that's why you're not going to see the US firmware out there. So what he was able to do is he was able to manipulate the firmware, and we kind of got it working. We were able to see traffics. This is a live capture between the Verilight controller and the Schlage device we used. You can start to pick out, we were able to pick out a few things. You'll see the home ID. All devices connected to the same gateway, they'll share that same home ID. If you look here, you can see this 26. Basically what that is that's the multi-level switch command. Since this was a lamp module, it was a dimmer. You can see the O1 is when you're setting, so you're setting the level. O2 is when it's getting the level, so when the device is talking back to the module to see its current state. And then O3 is just checking in on the status. So what happens randomly is these Z-Wave devices, they'll send traffic to the gateway, just say, hey, I'm still here. So that's that O3 packet where it's just sending its current status. And now I'll hand it over to Brian.
All right. So as Trevor mentioned, we learned a lot about network vulnerabilities throughout our project and that there are many different ways to breach a network. According to James Lewis, a senior fellow and director of technology and public policy programs at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., he said 96% of successful breaches could have been avoided if the victims had put in place simple to intermediate controls. But as we have learned, the best security cannot stop a bad guy with time and desire. Next, I'm going to talk about different ways you can help keep your home or business network and IoT devices safe. Starting with this was a post in October on staysafeonline.org stating that 40% of wireless access points are still using the manufacturer default username and passwords. This is way too easy of a fix. You just simply log into your router access point, change your passwords, change the username to something more difficult, and then that solves it. A quick Google search with the model name, and you can find the default username and passwords for that device. Also, when you're creating your passwords, don't use easy passwords, use complicated passwords. Sadly, the top 10 most commonly used passwords rarely change, like password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They might switch each other, but they usually stay the same. Also, another thing to consider is password recovery. So now you've just created this awesome, complicated password, and your challenge question when you forget your password is, what car do I drive? Well, that's simple. Someone that doesn't even know you can figure that out. So don't try to make complicated challenge questions also. And then also, when considering your network settings, the encryption for the wireless access point, try and use WPA2 or WPA at very minimum. WEP is way too insecure. Again, a quick Google search will give you a whole list of tools that can crack that type of encryption. So currently, we have around 25 billion connected devices to the internet. But with the Internet of Things, industry leaders such as Cisco estimate that in 2020, we'll have 50 billion devices connected. And so in just 5 years, we're expecting to double the number of connected devices. So as we introduce these new devices, we introduce more points of entry into our network and into our data. Z-Wave devices, along with any device, includes more open ports. Especially the Z-Wave devices, the ports are default on and you cannot turn them off. So you've got lots of unneeded open ports. Also, lack of transport encryption. As Trevor mentioned, a lot of this traffic is sent over the air in plain text. So if you're within range, you can pick up these packets and take time and start figuring out what these packets mean. Insecure web interfaces. Again, this is older technology. Some of them did not even have authentication options for the web interfaces. Most newer ones do today, though. And insecure firmware and software. Again, as Lucas and Trevor mentioned, you must sign an NDA when working with these devices in the development kit, and so the open exchange of knowledge and information is really limited. So with all these new devices and sometimes unavoidable vulnerabilities, here are some fairly simple things you can do when you get back home or back to your office to help protect your device and your data. Turn down your Wi-Fi access point power. This is a very simple thing. Simply log into your access point or your router, turn the power down. A lot of them are set default to 100, and a lot of times that's too strong. You don't need to broadcast your wireless signal 3 doors down. You just need to cover your home or your office. Also, like I mentioned, don't buy older Z-Wave technology. The firmware that you buy that comes with that product you're stuck with that. You cannot upgrade the firmware, do the low power model that Z-Wave uses. And then like anything, do your research. Look online, sometimes do the model name for whatever device you're looking to get, and then add vulnerabilities or exploits on the end of it, and a quick Google search might present some options there, or some things you didn't know about that device. And then back your data up. Again, as we introduce these more devices, these are more points of entry into your network. The same network where your personal pictures, your data, your tax files, all that resides. So even though the IoT device might not store data, your data is still in that network, and these are just more points of entry into that network. So the best thing you could do is back up your data.
So unlike some, our group does do summaries. We have just to start us off back from the top, I know this is a pretty technical talk and more gray hat oriented than most talks that you'll see here today. However, we're going to start off with the first. So Z-Wave is a common protocol used in many Internet of Things devices. We saw that in the research for those products that it was innovate first and then we worry about security later. Z-Wave is exploitable by technology costing less than $100. You saw this with our CC 1110 debugger, as well as a CC 1111 EMK, and perhaps even the Z-Wave remote, just most recently at DerbyCon. Our research attempted to replicate the prior research of those 3 talks. From the Computer Science House, we ordered a TI development kit, the CC 1110. We created a plan, we performed setup and flashed firmware. We then corrected the firmware and were able to see traffic and commands, however, we were unable to replay attacks. However, in future research, we hope this is something that we can do. Later, Brian talked about the common vulnerabilities in the Internet of Things. We see weak password standards, the usage of WEP instead of WPA and WPA2, the fact that just so many unneeded ports are open. We see that we have insecure software and that, we'll just fix it in the next generation instead of now. And lastly, we went over how to protect yourself, how a simple Google search could save your company, how that backing up your data from on your network can save just in case a security attack does happen, and the use of complicated passwords and passphrases usually generally saves your hide. Finally, we have our bibliography, and all these slides will be available online, just so that you guys can see. At this time, I'd like to invite the prior group from the Information Assurance Capstone class to come up back on stage, so that way we can answer any questions as a group related to any of our research upon home automation. Thank you. So, are there any questions? Mr. Baker. Yeah, Trevor, would you like to go over that?
We use the Verilight. It's made by Mikasa or something like that, sorry. But the Verilight, it's actually what I use at home because I do use home automation stuff, but we did use the Verilight. Some of the more insecure talks that you will see, they use a Raspberry Pi as their home controller. As Brian mentioned, no secure when logging into the device. Previously, it was fixed this summer, but up until this point, someone may not have the latest and greatest, so that's what he was making reference to. Any other questions? Lynn?
Yes, you mentioned the Z-Wave. You talked about that quite extensively. Are there other protocols? Are there other ways that we should be thinking about or using that would be safer?
At the time, the 2 big heavy hitters in the market is Zigbee and Z-Wave. That's what our research covered. During late 2009, 2010, a lot of utility companies started to adapt Zigbee. The reason for the technology at the time was sell power at low points. So basically they would sell power to your house, when cost is low, so you can control it from the thermostat. Time Warner, their smart system, they still use Zigbee. One of the downfalls is a lot of Zigbee products don't interconnect, whereas Z-Wave, it's standardized across the board. But those are the two that we're aware of. I'm not saying there isn't new emerging technology. Previously, there was a technology called X10 that worked through like the electrical outlets. It was prone to the same replay attacks. If someone plugged a device into your wall outlet, they could also capture traffic. It's not encrypted. And that was another talk we looked at also. But those are the three that I'm aware of. So X10, Zigbee, and then Z-Wave. Any other questions? In the back? I'll let you handle that one, John.
As for the iris system, no, there's not. It does not learn your patterns. That's why there's the smart rules that you set, the schedule to be active whenever you know your dog's going to be home or in that specific room. That's about all I can say for that. Is there any other questions? Yes. Everything runs through the Smart Hub. The Smart Hub is the only device that actually connects to the internet. Right. It does work itself without the internet connection. No, it would not. There is a backup plan. There is a Verizon cellular device that you can plug into the hub in case that scenario actually did play out. Anything else? Any other questions? Go for it.
How did the system react if you were to jam it when he does not test jamming?
We did not test jamming.
Jamming's illegal. You can't jam that band. So
But if you were a criminal and you were trying to break into something, you could.
it's just dead air between the devices. If you jam that band, the devices, they just can't communicate. Okay. Sorry.
Go for it.
So jamming at this range is illegal. You're not allowed, to purposely do the. Okay. The question JJ asked was, did you guys test any jamming with, our research? We did not. There are devices to do so, but it is illegal. Basically, how I gathered information is that's where they talked about assume the worst case. I mean, for instance, maybe if your light doesn't talk back, that's not a big issue. But if your door lock, door sensor, if it's a sensor, alert, that it was alarmed. If it's a door lock, lock it, make sure it's locked. Something along those lines, but we did not test any jamming. Any other question? Good.
It's located on the Smart Hub itself. It's on the Smart Hub itself. I'm sorry, what was that? Right. The Smart Hub is what controls the whole system. That's what you log into to be able to turn your stuff on, off. Right.
Because I was concerned that maybe it was out off some low site in the cloud or something, which means that everything you have is out there somewhere and could be vulnerable to attack as well.
As far as I know, it's on the it's on the Smart Hub itself. It's not on an actual.
The Verilight itself, if I go to their website, I can interface with it through their login, pending that the internet is up to my home. So you can log into it remotely from, not going to the address of the actual device, at least in my case. I don't have the iris, so I can't. I think you can log in though, right? But it is hosted. I mean, it does come back to your home network. So there is internet. I mean, if you wanted to log it, there is that case where if, someone was watching what you're doing, there is web traffic if you want to go to the the maker's website and log into your hub.
I saw another hand raised over there. Oh, go ahead.
What would be a game changer, notable game changer within the Z-Way to improve the security? What would have to change?
Everything being encrypted. The issue that we showed with the door lock, at the conference, there was Sigma design people in the audience. They stressed to the audience that this was a one-time case scenario. If that's true or not, we'll never know. What has happened, though, is the implementation of the company itself that was selling the lock didn't do the security layer correctly with their device, but it's all under NDA, and so a lot of this research, a lot of people don't touch this research because of that. There's no open community about this. Joshua Wright, who later went back and did Killer Z, he himself said he would rather just break into a home than deal with the research with this because of how Sigma Designs, they want everyone, let's keep it inside, but I guess the main thing is just everything be encrypted. But, then again, that raises the cost of, low-powered devices. Your door sensors aren't going to be $15 because there is going to be overhead to implement that layer also. So I guess my suggestion and what it seems is, make sure that everything is encrypted and do a really good job of implementing the encryption also. Yeah. Any other questions?